Hello and welcome to AXSchat. This week it's just me and Vicky Ross from Vicky Ross Writes. Deborah's and Antonio are skiving today, or otherwise known as on holiday, with it being peak silly season. So welcome, Vicky. I need to explain, I've known Vicky for rather too long. We worked together back in our formative years. So Vicky is a copywriter, and I think we're going to be talking about some really interesting topics today based around language. So Vicky, do you want to give us a bit of background as to your history and experience and how you got into copywriting?
Yeah, hi Neil, hi everybody. Thanks for having me today. I've been writing copy for about 20 years. My first or second job was with Neil. Kind of got into it by accident. I knew I always wanted to be a writer, but I didn't know what a copywriter was at that point. I got a job as a receptionist to start with, and I got sacked because I never wanted to be a receptionist. And I phoned my best friend to tell her I'd been sacked, and she was off sick that day. So I spoke to her boss, who said, come in and help my husband out. And that's where I met Neil. And I was the office assistant at a small agency in North London. And they wrote ads, and I asked if I could write one, and I did, and it was successful. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. And yeah, it was a kind of niche business as well, wasn't it? So it was particularly focused on sci-fi, and so yeah, writing, pretending to be interested about Boba Fett busts and so on. So yeah, really honed your skills.
I think any good copywriter can write about anything as long as they have enough information. Although having said that, I often tell teams that if there's an expert in the room on one particular subject that meets a brief, then you should get that writer to work on it, because that's the person that's going to write an authentic piece of copy and do the message justice. Okay.
So I think that often people dismiss copy as you know, or don't even notice copy. It's everywhere, and yet it's one of the ways that brands actually engage with conversations with their customers. So how do we get to have a natural conversation, and particularly thinking about this audience, how do we get to have a natural conversation which is inclusive of people who are different and who have disabilities?
So I've never considered an audience other than the wider audience, so nobody with disabilities, basically, because my technique is to always write conversationally and to use everyday language. It just so happens that the benefit of that is that it's accessible to everybody when you write in a more simpler way. There are lots of brands that are writing in marketing jargon, or a lawyer once told me it's called marketing puffery, which basically means it doesn't mean anything. Some of the things we write, like for example, earlier I saw Lexus's brand line as experience amazing. While those words aren't complex, put together, somebody with dyslexia, for example, who's trying to put words together in their mind in a different way to somebody else, those words don't naturally go together, so it feels a bit uncomfortable. But for anybody reading those words, you just think, what the hell are they saying? It's nonsense. So I think, like you said, the best copy goes unnoticed, but on purpose. It should just do the job sort of naturally and sort of effortlessly. I teach copywriting too. And I think lots of people come to my classes thinking they're going to learn some big secret, or I'm going to come up with some big reveal because I have 20 years of experience to share. And when I come out with, it's not rocket science, just write how you talk, I think people are really disappointed, actually, that they're not getting something bigger or more value for their money. But that is the secret. To write how you talk. I mean, that's a difficult thing to do when we're so conditioned at school to write so formally and proper. It's a difficult habit to break, to sort of use contractions like can't instead of cannot.
Yeah, but I suppose not only have you got the desire to talk in a conversation, to write in a conversational tone, but you've also got the constraints of how much space you've got. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about Twitter, is that despite it being quite difficult for me to compose language. Twitter distills stuff down, so you have to think about what you're going to say before you write it, or one would hope you do. It's not always the case from what I see in my stream, but it does, I guess, make you think about what you're doing. So there's definitely an art to composing a good tweet, and there must be, I would think there's an art to writing a good piece of copy as well.
There are so many words that you can get rid of, so I also teach at an advertising school. So when I mentioned teaching earlier, that's at private courses that I run with organisations like D&AD, which is a big advertising industry body that supports creatives from the beginning to the end of their career, pretty much. But teaching at school, because the students are closer to having left traditional education, they are writing formal English like we were taught. So they write quite long sentences with words like that in them. So, for example, I would think that you would like a cup of coffee. I just made that up. But you can take the word that out of nearly every sentence. So I would think you would like a cup of coffee still works. So that and very, those two words, they can always come out. And there is always a way to shorten a sentence and take out words that you don't need, or to use contractions like I mentioned, to get rid of two words and change them for one.
So obviously the key is to convey meaning and to be unambiguous. And I think that that's particularly important for people with specific learning difficulties, because actually we really want to stuff to be clear. Now, if you're engaging with people of an older generation, I think that's also the case. So you're teaching people across multiple areas. Can anyone be a copywriter? Or sort of what tools would you recommend? And sort of have you come across people with accessibility issues before who are working in the profession?
I like the question, can anyone be a copywriter? I recently wrote a blog post for the Marketing Society, and the title was "Everyone and No One is a Copywriter," because everyone can write something, but yet no one wants to call themselves a copywriter as they're entering into the industry, but that's a different topic. Can anyone be a copywriter? I think with the right experience and training and practice, I mean, anyone can do anything, right?
Yeah.
But can people with accessibility issues? So I'm really interested in this area, and until you and I started speaking recently, it wasn't even something I'd considered. I've met a lot of creative people with dyslexia, and it seems to be quite common, actually. I don't know if that's because the mind works in different ways and solves issues in a different way to maybe a more analytical mind, and that allows those people to be more creative. Having said that, in the lead up to this chat, I did speak with a number of creative people who, one in particular, interestingly, said that he could never have been a head of copy, even though he had written copy up until a certain point in his career. But he didn't think he could get to that top position because of his dyslexia, because he didn't think he was able to think quick enough, to write quick enough, or even to review other people's copy and be able to help and guide them in the team below him, which I thought was interesting, that you would get to a certain point and then think you'd have to stop. But he also said that being creative with dyslexia meant that he spent more time coming up with solutions to briefs. And I think we're in any industry, we're in such a fast-paced world, we're expected to deliver instantly. I mean, I think lots of people talk about being creative on demand, which is virtually impossible. You know, you don't often come up with an award-winning high sales idea just in a second. So people that spend time sort of thoroughly going through an idea and an execution often come up with the better goods. Yeah,
I think that also with it being text and creativity, you can use assistive technology. So I was rubbish with handwriting stuff. I be littered with spelling mistakes, etc. Nowadays, the advent of the computer has been a wonderful thing for me, because I've got spell checkers. I can dictate stuff. It frees up your creativity. Perhaps that colleague that you mentioned, if he knows about the technology that's available to him, he may not feel constrained in the same way. He may not have set himself those lower expectations, because I bet that he can verbalize perfectly well.
Yeah.
And then there are proofreading tools that would enable him to be able to then come back and help his colleagues, because obviously he's got a bright mind and is a creative thinker. So I think that actually it could be a really good career for people who have disabilities, that can work from home, can do stuff where don't necessarily have to be in the office. You so long as you can work in a sort of self-paced way of doing things, I think that there's a real potential.
Well, also you work in a creative team
Yeah.
in the industry that I'm in, so in advertising. There are a number of people involved before an ad actually goes live. And so another person told me that whilst he may have had issues with his own confidence, he would write copy and then pass it on to the rest of the people in the team to proofread. I think one issue that comes to mind is whilst we can put words into a tool and say them out loud, everyone talks just as everyone can write. Sometimes seeing words on a page or laid out in an advert can look different to how you might have intended them in your head. So you need to be able to recognize that. And check that no words are, this is getting technical, no words are sort of hanging off a line where they shouldn't be, or product names aren't split. So for example, I write for Sky, and if we're talking about Sky Atlantic, then we can't have Sky on one line and Atlantic on another line, because it's a product name and it's trademarked, and the words need to stay together. It's maybe too much information. But you mentioned something I wanted to touch on further about people with disabilities working in the industry. I can't remember what you said.
In terms of it quite often remote work suits people with disabilities, and because you're using text and it's not like you're doing graphic design type work, you could use a whole range of assistive technologies to create that text, whether it be dictating it, using a head pointer, or all kinds of different devices. You can still produce the text and get from what's in here onto the page.
So what I'm interested in on the working from home bit is, are there copywriters with a disability or dyslexia, probably more specifically, who work for themselves on a freelance basis? And how do they charge for their time, or do they charge by project, which is an endless issue for any freelancer anyway? And what does the client, does the client know? Is it an open relationship? Do people feel supported in their career with these issues? I think certainly we're starting to see adverts with people of a disability starring in them, where the advert isn't about the disability, they're just cast alongside an able-bodied person. But we can't just represent them in the adverts, we have to have them in the creative team as well for a more diverse workforce. There's actually an agency I found out about recently called Disability Club. Excuse me, I've made some notes. I don't want to get this wrong, because how they describe themselves, I really think it's important to say. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Disability Club. Diversity isn't showing disabled people in ads. Diversity is hiring them.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting. I was at Channel 4 not that long ago, where they were talking about their Paralympics coverage, and I know that you and I have discussed the Superhumans ad, which a lot of people love. A few people said was inspiration porn, but generally I think does more positive than negatives. They also put a lot of people behind the camera as well. So in 2012, they had a large number of people with disabilities working behind the camera. In 2016 for Rio, there were even higher numbers. So I think it is important that there's representation on both sides of the camera.
Yeah. And so if you were at Channel 4, you probably know, again, preparing for this talk today, I did a lot of research because this isn't an area I've considered before. I'm actually ashamed to say, and I'm really keen to take it further. So that's for future. But I read that Channel 4 offered advertisers £1 million worth of commercial airtime in exchange for an advert that promotes diversity, which is part of their wider commitment to improve diversity in advertising every year until at least 2020. I don't know if other channels are doing that. And maybe it being sort of quite quiet on the news front. I'd rather it was quite a quiet news piece. I don't want channels doing it to get the sort of publicity for doing a good thing. They should be doing a good thing anyway, whether the public know about it or not. But then we see the ads, and then we see that it is being made public because we see the results, is what I mean. So Maltesers, that was a huge ad. I don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, I've seen the Maltesers ad. It's very good.
Yeah, it is good. But whilst we're starting to see such thoughtful work, we need to be mindful that we're doing it in the right way. So whilst Maltesers did a great series of ads, they also ran a Braille poster in a bus shelter. And how does a partially sighted or blind person know to go and touch the bus shelter? Like, surely that should have been an audio ad. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. You can put accessible materials in inaccessible places.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've seen quite a lot of times. We had a guy on here called Gavin Neat who works with pedestrian crossings for people who are blind. And if you go to a pedestrian crossing, you'll see this little thing underneath the box that you press the button on, which is actually rotating, which is actually to tell people whether or not to cross if you're visually impaired.
Right.
But where they position the buttons and the things to start the crossing is purely thought about in terms of where people would go to view the traffic. So if you're blind, you don't know where you're necessarily going to find the actual thing to press the crossing. So you're having to search around the whole time. So yeah, there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that, and we're certainly not mature in any way. You started something called Copacabana. And I was really interested because I think that we talk a lot about language here, and I really wanted to have this conversation because I think that really we want to engage the wider copywriting community to really engage and be inclusive. So can you tell us a little bit about Copacabana and some of the stuff that you're doing on Twitter?
Yeah, so Copacabana is an event for anybody really with an interest in copywriting. So copywriters, obviously, but also marketers, advertisers, planners, strategists, anyone that's involved in that, creative process. So it's a day in Bournemouth. It's 12 speakers. I did the first one last year, and it was really just better than I could have ever expected. I never thought I'd ever put on an event. So we're doing another one this year, and it's at the end of September, and it's almost sold out already. But I think what you actually mean is my hashtag Copywriters Unite, which I started. Did you want to say something?
No, I knew Copacabana was the event. I just think it would be great at some future time to maybe have some of those discussions. But yes, you're right. There's two things. There's the event, and then there's the Copywriters Unite.
Just quickly to your point about the event. So last year we had a speaker from Cancer Research UK, and I don't want to say which speaker was more engaging than another because they all gave such different talks, but you could have heard a pin drop with her. She talked about writing with care. The subject could have been anything, but it really made people think about how they write. And she spoke a lot on not using jargon, using easy to understand language. which I can share with you and your community later because I have it on YouTube.
Oh,
but
fantastic.
Back to the point. So Copywriters Unite is a hashtag I started, I don't know, about 5 years ago. From a copywriter's point of view, I felt that we weren't sort of connecting as a community, and that copywriters don't always have the right support in coming up in their career. Sometimes in an advertising agency, a copywriter will report to a creative director and not a head of copy. And often a creative director has a copywriting background, but they still lack that sort of person in between that will give them dedicated copy support. So that lives on Twitter, this hashtag, where it's grown into people talking to each other, using it every day, sharing good copy, making connections, finding support from each other. It's turned into a live quarterly meetup. Started in London, it's now around the UK. So I have various hosts that just welcome people into a pub and we just have a drink and things naturally happen. So people have made friends, made connections, found work, collaborated on projects. And I think that we should use the hashtag to talk to copywriters on the subjects that we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons, aside from nostalgia and getting to chat with an old chum, that I wanted to bring you on was I saw some parallels in what you were doing with what we've been doing with AXSchat, because that was a fragmented bunch of disparate communities that didn't really have a home on Twitter, and over the last couple of years we've brought more and more people together to have conversations. We haven't had the physical meetups yet. Obviously, there are possibly greater challenges for us, but I think that at some point we're just going to have to and do it over some alcohol, preferably. So I thought that was one area that there were definitely some parallels, and I'm very interested to engage with the copywriting community, because a lot of, as you say, a lot of them felt maybe slightly unloved, maybe slightly the career prospects are not fully understood, or the path is not mapped out, and that maps quite neatly to often the experience of people with disabilities too, being slightly othered, and so I think that it would be really interesting to engage these two communities and see the overlaps, and also see how we can use language in a positive way. I'm being video bombed by my doggy, who is whining at me because we're
I think you're right. I wouldn't like to say that the Copywriters Unite community has the same issues as your community. That would be massively unfair, but I do think that there is a way that we could work together. So just going back to the lady from Cancer Research who spoke at Copacabana last year. By the way, can I just say it's called Copacabana because another event called Silicon Beach hosts us, and every beach needs a cabana, which is why it's got that funny name. Also, I wanted to be it to be fun and a celebration. Anyway, when the lady from Cancer Research spoke, after she'd finished, we had a number of people come up to us asking if they could write copy for Cancer Research for free. Because I think a lot of us in advertising, it's sometimes thought of as a bit of a dirty job, and quite often we would like to do something that has more meaning and more worth, but we maybe don't always have the opportunity to. And just by doing the small amount of research for this call, I found a lot of people very interested in what I was going to be talking about, and wanting to find out more about this chat. So I'd be really interested to see what people sort of take out from this on my side of things and how we can get more involved. There are agencies that don't do all the dirty work. There's an agency called The Good Agency who obviously do work for good, and they do great work for good. And I would love to talk about them till the cows come home, really. But the need for doing good, actually, I think is reflected by the younger students that I teach at this advertising school that I mentioned, the School of Communication Arts. So every year there is a level of interest in in doing work for good, not just for the big brand names. And every year that level of interest increases, so much so that the students come in with these amazing fresh minds, and they create products or come up with ideas that if these people all go on to be huge successes, which I think they will, we could be living in a fantastic world. I mean, just to give you two examples, two guys, Owen Hunter-Jenkins and Ethan Bennett, last year, they wanted to take used Ford car parts and reappropriate them for prosthetic limbs. And this year, another student, Max Lombor, he patented an idea, and I don't know if this exists actually already, an LED pen for people with dyslexia, who, when they write, if they spell a word wrong, it buzzes, and then in the screen comes up the correct spelling of the word, so they can go again, so they learn while making mistakes. Does something like that already exist?
There are things that scanning pens that can, but not something that's doing it while you're writing. To be honest, these days I write infrequently. I've got a pen in my hand now, but it's only me that reads my own scrawl, and that's good because it saves me from embarrassment. Because most of the time it's full of crossings outs and misspellings, whereas one of the joys of living in the digital age is that you don't have that. You can use the proofing tools. You can pretty much work on a level playing field with anyone else. I think that it's been tremendously liberating for me personally, but I think that a lot of people do still like to write, and it seems like a really neat idea, particularly for school age kids.
Yeah. So you prefer to write digitally. If you were to come to one of my copywriting workshops, I say that you're not allowed to bring your laptop and you have to write with pen and paper, because I think so many people, not everyone, obviously, everyone's different, but so many people write better or are more sort of free with their creativity when they have a pen to just let flow, whereas on a computer with a white screen and black text in a, potentially ugly font, it can be quite limiting. But what do you think?
I think that for the 80% of people that aren't on the neurodiverse spectrum, then that's probably the case.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that for me personally, the act of writing takes up most of my concentration, and therefore by using a computer, and I tend to, if I really want to be creative, I will dictate. So I'll use this microphone and software, and I will say something, and that's how I am creative. And yeah, I have access to a higher vocabulary than if I was going to write. So I would say, I would challenge your assumption somewhat, and I think that people reach their creativity in somewhat different ways, and so perhaps you want to try different ways. So maybe get people to record stuff into dictaphones, or get ideas down in multiple different ways. I mean, yes, I could write stuff down, and we could brainstorm, or we could put stuff up on a whiteboard and all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's not an impossible barrier, but it lowers the quality of my personal ideas. But each person is different, so I think the art of accessibility is the art of being flexible.
Well, with anyone, everyone works differently, and what works for one doesn't work for another.
So this has been fascinating, and I know that we're going to have some great discussions tomorrow night. I think we've pretty much reached the end of our half hour. I need to thank Barclays Access for helping us keep the lights on and sponsor and supporting us. I almost said sponsor there, wrong word.
No.
Yeah, get the copyright, Neil. So thank you very much, Vicky Ross. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and we'll see you on Twitter tomorrow night.
Yes, look forward to it. Thank you.